video. So if you take a look at the very first question here, I noticed that I haven't really looked at it yet, but I do see what appears to be a acid-base problem here. Because I think you have, I can't remember if that's citric or lactic acid and the sodium hydroxide. So it looks like we have an acid-base problem to start off with. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of keep scrolling down here. Okay, so lactic acid, sodium hydroxide. So let's go through this first question here. It says, a student is studying the reaction between lactic acid and sodium hydroxide, NaOH, as represented in the balanced equation above. The structural formula for lactic acid is shown in the following diagram. Circle the hydrogen that most readily participates in the chemical reaction with sodium hydroxide. So I've actually not seen a question like this on an AP exam before. So that may or may not bode well, depending upon how easier some of the other questions are going to be. But as I go through and look at this, what I notice is I've got a carboxylic acid functional group here. And what that tells me, first off, it's not any of these hydrogens here that are attached to the carbons. Those are very stable hydrogens. They're not going to detach in a simple acid-base reaction. So we're really kind of already narrowed it down to two possible hydrogens here. But because this is that COOH group, when this acid donates a hydrogen, it donates off of that carboxylic acid group. And so I venture to say that that is probably the hydrogen that is going to be donated in that reaction. So we're looking at a little bit of a unit 8 here, probably molecular structure of acids and bases, thinking about how we can go through and determine relative strengths of acids. But that's kind of a new one on me. I know carboxylic acids are a part of the structural components of acids and bases for AP Chemistry. But again, it is a little bit of a new type of question for me to go through and take a look at. So yeah, I'm going to pick that hydrogen there and sincerely hope for the best. So that being said, let's go ahead and scroll down to the next part here. It says a student begins the experiment by dissolving 10.22 grams of sodium hydroxide in enough water to produce 500 milliliter solution. Calculate the molarity. Okay, so this is a pretty simple calculation. We're going to solve for molarity. Molarity is just simply moles of solute over liters of solution. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 10.22 grams. And we are going to simply utilize the molar mass that's given to us. Nice that we don't have to go periodic table hunting for that, to 1 mole. And then what we're going to do with that is we are going to divide by 0.500 liters. So that way we get our molarity. So we're going to take 10.22 divided by 40. And what we get is 0.2555 from that. And we're just going to take moles over liters, and so we're going to divide that by 0.5. And when I round to 3 sig figs, I'm going to get 0.511 molar NaOH. That is a 5, I promise. Okay, so it seems like simple enough so far. The first question kind of surprised me a little bit, but let's kind of see what we have moving on here. So I'm guessing we'll probably have a little bit more acid-base stuff and go from there. All right, so a student uses the sodium hydroxide solution from part B, a burette, and a pH meter, and 100 milliliter flask to titrate a 25 milliliter sample of lactic acid solution. The student's data are shown in the following graph. Okay, so we have a nice little pH graph here. Use the information on the graph to determine the approximate pKa of lactic acid. Well, what we do know here, and I teach Unit 8. I teach the acid bases units last because I know that that's an important component of the AP exam. And in addition to that, a lot of my students haven't had a lot of strong, no pun intended, strong acid chemistry before, even though this is ironically a weak acid. But because this is a weak acid, I know that the pKa is the same as the pH at my half equivalence point. And so the full equivalence point is at 16 milliliters here, so the half equivalence point is at 8. So there's my half equivalence point, and the pH, which would be the same as pKa, is probably around 3.8-ish, somewhere in there, maybe 3.9. You know, again, it depends on how you go through and read the graphs. I know sometimes the College Board's a little bit pickier than not sometimes on some of these. Not a big deal. Obviously, we want accuracy as a big component of making sure that we go through and do the AP exam appropriately, but that will be how I interpret that question. So let's move on. So the preceding diagram represents relative amounts of the major species in a sample of solution in the flask. Water molecules are omitted. Draw an X on the titration curve where the reaction mixture would be represented by this diagram. So looks like here we have our acid, and these are going to be of the conjugate base. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to look for relative concentration and trying to determine if this is going to be before or after the half equivalence point. So if I take a look here, HA, I have 4 molecules of HA and only 2 molecules of A minus. So what that tells me is that my HA is in greater concentration, or my acid is greater in concentration than my conjugate base. So if I go back up at the top here, what that's going to tell me is that this has to be at a point that is prior to my half equivalence point. So X on the diagram, boom, right there. Because again, at this point in the graph, the concentration of the acid is greater than that of the concentration of the conjugate base because we are before the half equivalence point. Scroll a little bit, it does say to justify the answer, and that's exactly my justification, is that prior to the half, sorry, I'm going to shorthand this extensively. Prior to the half equivalence point, the concentration of HA is greater than that than the concentration of A minus. And obviously, you probably want to provide a little bit stronger justification than just that, but that's where I am in regards to this problem. It's pretty straightforward, as long as you know your acids and bases. So let's keep moving on. Okay. So it says here, a student repeats the experiment but uses a solution of NaOH with twice the concentration. So twice the concentration as shown in the preceding table. In the following graph, draw the titration curve that would be expected for experiment 2. So if the concentration doubles, what that implies to me is it is not going to require as much volume of base to reach the equivalence point. In fact, if it's doubled, it means I should only need half the milliliters in order to reach the equivalence point. So that being said, I'm going to draw my titration curve looking a little bit like this to ensure that the equivalence point of the titration is at a volume of 8 rather than a volume of 16. So concentration does play an impact on when equivalence point is reached. I do think that they've extended this graph a little bit, thinking that maybe some people will double that to go to 32. But because it is twice the concentration, it should only take half the time in order to reach the equivalence point of this titration. So in the third experiment, my goodness, this student is quite busy. In the third experiment, student investigates the enthalpy of reaction. Okay, so now we're moving into a little bit of thermal dynamics if we're talking about enthalpy. So let's see what we got going on here. It says the student combines 100 milliliters of 0.5 molar lactic acid at 20 degrees Celsius with 100 milliliters of 0.5 molar NaOH solution at 20 degrees Celsius in a calorimeter. The final temperature of the combined solution is 23.2. Assume the density of each solution before combining is 1 gram per milliliter, and the specific heat is 4.2. And it wants to know the heat in joules. So as I read this, it gives a specific heat. It wants to know heat in joules. So this is clearly a Q equals MC delta T. We're solving for Q. The mass of the solution in and of itself is a total of 200 milliliters. So that implies to me that the total mass of the solution is 200 grams. The specific heat says it's 4.2, and your delta T is going to be your final minus initial temperature. So it's going to be 23.2 minus the 20.0. And so we're just going to plug into our calculator and solve for that. So that's going to be 200.0 with the correct sig fig. So I'm going to round that to 3. So 200 times 4.2 times 3.2. So I end up with 2690 joules from that reaction. Again, pretty sure we go through and we combine those masses in order to get the gram number for the solution. That's something I'm a little bit iffy on, if I'm perfectly honest here. No, I probably shouldn't be because I've been teaching chemistry for quite some time now, but we will just have to wait and see when the final results come out. So I'm going to scroll down to the next problem here. Okay, it says molar enthalpy of the reaction. So we are going to use the information from the previous problem here. So 2690 joules. Enthalpy is in kilojoules per mole, so we are going to convert our joules to kilojoules. 1,000 here. It's 2.69 kilojoules. It's kilojoules per mole. Now, if I remember this correctly, we only need to get the mole number out of one of these. So we're given volume here, and we're given molarity. So if I know the mole number for that, I can divide by that mole number and get the enthalpy of the reaction. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just take our solution here. So it was a, 0.5 molar solution in 100 milliliters. So 0.5 molar. And 100 milliliters is 0.100 liters. Oh, come on, Joe, write that correctly. So what I should end up with is 0.0500 moles. And we're just going to plug that in here and divide that out. So 2.69 divided by 0.05. And that gives me an enthalpy of 53.8 kilojoules. And the other thing we need to actually consider is the sign in our answer, which is something that is important. So what we have here is a situation, I'm going to draw a little beaker down here, where the temperature of the water actually increases. Remember, when you do calorimetry, you're always measuring the temperature of the surroundings, right? So if the temperature of the water gets warm, energy is leaving the system and going into the surroundings. So what that tells me is that this is actually an exothermic process. So the sign for this should actually be negative as we go through that. And you could probably maybe figure that out here, but when it does say include your sign in your answer, you really do want to consider what's actually happening in the beaker in regards to whether the reaction is endo or exothermic or not. So you again, keep that back in mind. That I am a little bit iffy on, but again, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. Maybe we'll watch some other videos and see what they come up with. So lastly, the student claims that if heat is lost from the calorimeter to the surrounding air during the reaction, the experimental, the molar enthalpy will be smaller in magnitude. I made that kind of hard to read. Use the highlighter. So loss to the air and molar enthalpy will be smaller. So let's think about this logically here. So if some of the heat is lost to the air, that means that the joule value for the reaction is going to be lower. If that is the case, then the kilojoule value we calculated will be lower. And if that is the case, then when I go through and calculate the value for delta H, it should also be lower. So if I really kind of go back and think about how these errors, these mistakes change the numerical values of my formulas, I can very easily go back and solve and figure out what actually happens to these during the reaction. So, I kind of figured joules is going to be decreased when we go through and calculate it because the temperature is going to be lower. Kilojoules is going to be lower, enthalpy will be lower. So I would actually agree with the student, and that is a very rare occurrence. Student is 1 for 1 on this exam in regards to whether I agree or disagree. So typically I disagree with the student more often. Typically that's a good way for the College Board to ask for you to demonstrate your knowledge about something rather than having to agree. But as long as you go through and fully justify your answer, you should be in good shape. So, and that's the end of question 1. Awesome.